Yeah, welcome to Drinkin, Bros. Kids, we got a fine Wednesday afternoon show today, D'Anthony. We've got Jack Carr on the show. I feel like this is a guest that is long overdue. Best-selling author, Navy SEAL, podcast host. What don't you do, Jack?
Oh man, there's a lot of things that I'm juggling right now, but I feel extremely fortunate to have to juggle all those things. So it's a good chapter in life right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, your book, The Terminalist, that was made into a series, correct?
Yeah, it comes out July 1st, starring Chris Pratt.
Who?
Which is nice because the book's very violent. Ran into a couple issues there where some senior executives were a little uncomfortable with how violent it was, but we won all those battles. But I keep thinking about how interesting it would have been to have had a different actor, even though Chris Pratt's the only person I wanted, but to have one that was crazy left-leaning and anti-gun and all this stuff, yet playing a character who is using these tools and who is obviously not those things.
Oh, you mean like Sean Penn?
Or I guess anyone.
The gun. He literally was in The Gunman, but he's like, oh, you shouldn't.
I didn't see it. I keep meaning to see that.
it's there's no
nothing, no reason.
No,
okay,
it's terrible.
I'll deprioritize that on my list.
It's terrible.
But yeah, Chris was awesome, and he's already comfortable around firearms. Such a good guy. Antoine Fuqua directing, who is the Training Day, Tears of the Sun, Magnificent Seven, Equalizer, and he's just so solid as they come. So I got extremely lucky. Got a great crew working on that thing.
It's amazing. Have you seen any of the footage yet?
Oh yeah. So I've seen the whole thing, and it's in the stage of post-production now, where they scrub like the wires out of the stuntmen that get pulled when there's an explosion, or take the house off the hill that shouldn't be there in the background, like that sort of a thing. So just those minor edits with the visual effects, and then it's done.
That's got to be exciting. I mean, you sit down and write. I'm an author as well. Not to yank my own dong. New York Times bestselling author. You're welcome as well.
Hey.
But it's hard to write just one book, let alone the gajillion you've written. When you sat down to write The Terminalist, did you have anyone in mind in case a movie or a TV series was going to be made? Because a lot of us writers do. When you sit down and write, you like to picture different people. It almost helps in the writing process. Was that the same with you as well?
It was, and I think that has a lot to do with being a child of the 80s, just growing up and knowing that after my time in the SEAL teams that I would do exactly this. Of course, growing up, I'm reading books, and I'm thinking about, hey, if they made this into a movie, who would be the best person to play it? That was just a normal part of my life. So when I sat down to write The Terminalist, I thought the same thing. And Chris Pratt had only been in Parks and Rec, and then a very small part in Zero Dark 30, where he plays a SEAL. And for whatever reason, I thought, this is the guy. And I thought of like Tom Hanks in the 80s doing all the comedies, and then taking a risk in the early 90s with Philadelphia, and then being able to do really whatever he wants. And so I thought, who's that guy for this generation? I need a likable character, someone who's patriotic, supports the military, and that's the guy who needs to take a risk.
Yeah, that was a big risk for Tom Hanks. Like, he went out and got AIDS. And
he did, yeah.
I mean, it's like that. That's commitment. You talk about fucking Daniel Day-Lewis all you want. Sure. I don't remember him ever getting AIDS.
I don't either.
For a role.
I don't either. And he's method. And so you've got to get AIDS for a role.
But James Reese is kind of he's a badass, but also a smart ass, right? Which is like, once I remember seeing Zero Dark 30, and as soon as I saw Chris kitted up and just kind of being himself, being a dick around his buddies in the team room and shit, I'm like, yeah, this dude is going to be an action star at some point. Mm-hmm. Like, you never would have thought that the early days of Parks and Rec.
No.
He was like about 40 pounds overweight, just a goofy dude. Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, all right, this dude is legit. He's taking it seriously now. Yeah, I can't think of anybody else who would play that role, to be honest.
Yeah, and he crushes. And at the time when I was thinking that, so that's my last year and a half in the military, and I have no connection to Chris Pratt, no connection to Hollywood, no connection to publishing or anything like that. But I just thought of Chris Pratt, and I thought of Antoine Fuqua, because I loved he did his shooter, I loved all this stuff, and I thought that's my team right there. And then right before the book came out, well, about 4 months before the book came out, a buddy of mine I hadn't talked to in about 5 years from the SEAL teams calls me up out of the blue and says, "Hey man, I always wanted to thank you for what you did for me in the teams." And I couldn't even remember what it was. And he said, "Hey, you're the only person that sat me down, talked to me about transitioning out into the private sector, introduced me to people in the private sector. You're the only one that cared enough to do that. And I always wanted to thank you." And I was like, "Hey, no problem." And then he said, "Hey, I heard you have a book coming out." And I said, "Yeah, I can send you a rough draft if you want to take a look." And he said, "Yeah, I'd like that, but I'd also like to give it to a friend of mine." And I said, no problem. Who's that? And he said, Chris Pratt. So I was like, oh, yeah. Coincidentally, I just thought of him playing this role. And then so he gave it to Chris. Chris read it and called next week and wanted to option it before it even came out. And at the same time, Antoine got it and wanted to direct. So they were trying to figure out who was going to do what. And then Antoine calls Chris and says, hey, let's do this thing together.
Antoine is so good at producing and directing action shit that not like Michael Bay, giant explosions in the background, but like hand-to-hand combat, close quarters combat, stuff that you and I have done in real life. And not that we're even the primary audience for it, we're such a small segment of America, but when people routinely will ask us, like the Hurt Locker and shit, people always ask us like, oh, shit like that real? Like, no, it's a fucking retarded. That's the dumbest shit I've ever seen. But when you see something that's written by a guy that's actually been there, and then you give it to Antoine, who is, man, just all the stuff he's done. I know the director doesn't handle everything down to the fucking micro level, but watch all of his series.
But he's pretty close, though.
Yeah, watch his series and the films that he's been involved in, and the weapons handling and all, like the move. This is the way people move around through the universe, the way he directs. I don't think he's ever had any experience in the military, right? But he's certainly fucking listened to people that have told him what it looks like.
He goes all in. I remember sitting in a theater in LA watching Training Day for the first time, and it was packed in Los Angeles. And my God, man, it was incredible. And you were immediately like, who is this director? And he's been on fire ever since.
But even Tears of the Sun he was involved in way back in the day.
Oh, dude, yes.
What was that, like 97 or some shit? I mean, he's been around.
It was later, but he's...
it was later.
That's what I saw, too. You know, I saw those movies, and I'm like, this is the guy.
Oh, it's 2003.
So I just thought of him as an awesome director. But then when I met him, I'm like, oh, he is much more than a director, and now he's a dear friend. But he's a visionary, and he's like one of those people that stands head and shoulders above like other people that you've met. I don't know if I'm describing that right, but someone who stands out is just a good, solid human, and at his craft is just head and shoulders above everyone because he's not just a director, he's a visionary, and he is just awesome. Such a great guy.
Yeah, wild story. I actually screen tested for Tears from the Sun with Antoine. Yeah, and so I got to sit with him. Usually, you just go in, you read, and then that's kind of it, right? You leave. But he actually took every actor and was like, "Hey, tell me about your life. What do you do? What are your hobbies? And you're like, what? I was so thrown off, and I had like the most genuine conversation with him for like 20 minutes. And this was an audition process. Like, dude, if he spent that much time with everybody, that dude's gonna be there all fucking day. Like, it was insane. Not only a great director, but just like you were saying, a great human being. And you couldn't have gotten luckier on this. I mean, the stars really aligned for Antoine Fuqua and Chris Pratt. This thing's going to explode.
It's pretty good for people that are used to Chris being in like, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy and Avengers and that stuff. It's a little more campy. Like he's violent and he is dark. And that was important to have someone that's likable, because if they're going to go that dark, you want a character that's someone who's likable on and off screen already. That's what I was thinking anyway. So, and he pulls it off. He crushes. He loved doing the weapons work. And we had a bunch of military people on set the whole time to make sure that he was, doing things the right way. And, you're doing things, Hollywood-esque, but you're trying to make it as tactically sound as possible at the same time. And man, we got really lucky. It's awesome.
It's not just luck. I mean, it's you go to one of the top billed fucking action actors in the world, and maybe when it comes down to action movies that are realistic and deal with real life events, Fuqua is like the best, right? So far as I can tell, I haven't seen anybody that does it better than him.
Yeah.
People like that don't come to your fucking project because you're lucky. They come because what you wrote was a fucking masterpiece. You know what I mean?
But the hardest part about it is, and you know this, there's a million books that are optioned by studios that are just sitting on shelves. There's scripts that are just sitting on shelves, and they don't get made for whatever reason. And they come in and they say the same thing. All right, we need a huge box office star who's going to sell this thing globally, because they don't really give a shit about the United States. That's a small segment of money that's coming in. They really care about who's going to sell globally. Chris Pratt is that guy, especially after Jurassic Park and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
And then Antoine Fuqua on top of that, because I know how busy his schedule is, because he's doing a $160 million movie for Apple, I believe, with Will Smith next.
It's going to be good. Like I didn't get to go to set. There's too much going on, but from talking to Antoine and talking to the people that were there, they said that Will Smith crushes, and the thing is going to be different than anything Antoine's ever done before. So I'm fired up to see that.
Is it Emancipation?
Yeah.
And one of my college buddies has produced that movie, Joey McFarland, and so he's been working on it forever. He's look. A lot of people in town have said Will probably win an Oscar from it. I haven't seen anything at dailies or any of that stuff whatsoever, but that's the rumor going around town. So I'm interested to see it.
Yeah, I heard some of the stories from set. It was quite. I hope they do a huge behind the scenes type thing, because just making that was a movie in and of itself. Kind of like you see those movies about Apocalypse Now, just how crazy it was making that thing. Well, there was some behind the scenes stuff in this, just with COVID and weather and all the rest of it, that made this a pretty interesting project, to say the least, from what I understand. Anyway, and Antoine, actually, his first exposure, I think, to the military was on the Tears of the Sun set, when they had a bunch of actual SEALs there helping out, doing technical advising or whatever. And these guys kept, because as you know, in Hollywood, there's these unions and you can only do certain things. And now I kind of understand why that's the case. But when these guys were on set for Tears of the Sun, they just kept running around doing things, like doing stuff that wasn't their job, to help. And I think that was his first insight into the military and special operations in general. And he's been a fan ever since.
Just out of curiosity, you said there was some pushback on the violence. What was it in particular, and how do those conversations go? Because usually the studio steps in, they say, no, you can't do this. You tell them to go fuck off, and then they're like, great, well, we'll just pull a fucking movie. Now, clearly you're not going to do that with Chris Pratt and Antoine Fuqua. So what were those conversations like, and what scenes specifically were too violent?
I'm gonna keep the exact scenes just so it's a surprise, because people are wondering if a couple scenes are gonna make it in. But some of the more violent ones, two in particular. But it goes up, so the script goes up even though you're already filming. Your things are changing because things change in script 2, 3, episode 3 or whatever, which affects episode 7 or 6 or 8. So you have to continually evolve these things, and they go up the chain all the way up to Amazon executives, and then they come back down with those notes, and then you get them back down here with the showrunner who's kind of managing all the chaos, and then you discuss it and then figure out the best way to kind of get things back to where you want them to be. And there's a little give and take there. It's there's obviously you want to be kind about it and figure it out, but yeah, it just took a little strategizing. I'd say is the best way to go about it. Me and Chris and Antoine and the showrunner, and just figuring it out and coming up with the best approach, and then going forward and making it happen. So yeah, we won on all of them, and it's good. Yeah, it's good. I mean, I can't wait for it to hit. I think all episodes are dropping at once on July 1st, so that's good. Each one's about an hour each, and and everybody else was great too. Like all the other actors in there, I didn't get the feeling from any of them that they were like Hollywood. Everybody was so kind. Everybody was just there doing a job, excited to be a part of it. And then Antoine was like the commanding officer. He was like commanding officer at the top, setting the tone up here. And then Chris was like the platoon commander or the troop commander, setting that tactical level tone for the entire set. So many people would come up to me and say, hey, I've been on hundreds of movie sets, and none of them have felt like this one. And then they'd say, hey, like my daughter's going to boot camp tomorrow. Could you sign a book? Or my son's going on his first deployment as a Marine. Would you mind signing something? And so it was really different. And people made a point to tell me how different it was from all the other sets they'd been on. And that's due to Chris and Antoine.
Yeah. I mean, the cast is great. LaMonica Garrett, a lot of our people will recognize him as Sam Elliott's partner in 1883, the new 1883 series. He's been in everything. You'll see his face and immediately know who he is. JD Pardo, who works with Rocco on Mayans MC. Like there's a ton of great actors in this.
Yeah, I'm amped. Is it just one season, or if it does well, does it go multiple? How does that work?
So it's one season right now. So the good thing, if you have a series go where people don't really know the actors and they're just kind of happy to be working, then you can just boom, knock out season after season. Mm-hmm. But if you have Chris and you have Antoine, they're like scheduled 3 years in advance. Chris has to go do another like Jurassic World and Guardians and all these other things. So I don't think it'll come right on the heels next year when you're dealing with those schedules. It'll be like every other type thing. But I guess you have to see how it does first. But I know they're talking about it already. So it tested very well, I guess is the best way to put it with test audience.
Well, how many total books are there in that series? The Terminal List is there's what, 5 of them, I think?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So this one is the 5th one. Yeah, this is a rough draft here. I just finished right before I came on. I finished my 3rd pass edits.
Flip them fast because these people will pause the screen and try to read the book in advance.
Yeah, so that's it right there. So I print it out when I get to these different stages. I print it out, go through it with my red pen. This one right here. So not 5 minutes before we came on did I send my last pass into to Simon & Schuster for a few minor little copy edits mostly at this point.
I think a lot of our people have probably read. I've read the entire series and some of your other books as well. I've always been a big fan, like the entire Mitch Rapp series. I've read all of those. I've read a lot of these. Right, they're just Mitch Rapp is probably before yours came along. His was the best in my opinion, and it was because of the brutality. Because it was something that I had experienced, and it did seem like even in the literature sometimes it seemed like people would round the edges off a little bit. Like, no, that's not what would have happened there. He would have fucking broken this guy's face in half. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the dedication because, look, when you first started writing these back in the day, you didn't know that it was going to turn into all this. You just wrote it the way you fucking wrote it. You know what I mean? That's one thing that I've always appreciated about your work.
Oh man, thank you. And interestingly enough, Simon & Schuster has never pressured me at all to like, hey, you make these a little less violent, or hey, does he have to be so pro Second Amendment here? Or they've never ever mentioned or even hinted at anything like that. And I didn't know stepping into that, like how I would deal with it if they did, but I haven't had to deal with it. They've just been totally supportive the whole time, total creative control on my end, which is I feel sincerely appreciative of that.
Yeah.
That's extremely rare. I don't think people understand how rare that is. Usually the editors will put a foot in your throat and just be like, hey, dude, you're taking this out and it's either my way or the highway.
Wow, interesting. Like, so yeah, that's my only experience with it. I've only been to one publishing house, one editor there. But like, she doesn't even ask me, what's your next book about? And they're paying you. And so I thought, hey, at least they'd want to know, because, now they're paying, not something, it's not insignificant now, like maybe it was in the beginning. It's never insignificant, but like they don't even ask. They don't even ask what's it going to be about until they get it, which always makes me think, what if they hate it? Like, what if it's horrible? And so anyway, I asked her about that actually about a month or so ago because I was curious, and she said, yeah, it's it's a tough conversation to have with an author when they spend a year doing something and they turn something in, and you really need to go back to square one. So haven't had that experience yet, and hopefully I won't, but it's very cool to have that creative control. So in my head, I don't have to think about politics, not in the sense of Republican Democrat, but politics as far as workplace. Like my agent wants me to do this, the publisher's saying this, what am I going to do? I don't want to make anybody mad, or they've been so kind. There's none of that. Zero. It is only what I want to put in there, and no direction at all from anybody else, which is it's totally freeing. I feel so free because of it. But the other part of that is I can't blame anybody. If people don't like it, then it's only on me. Same thing with the series. Like a lot of authors, like you said, their books get optioned and they are totally out because they want to get rid of the author right away. Antoine and Chris wanted me involved from day one. So now I'm tied to it. So if people don't like it, I can't be like, Hollywood messed it up. Like, no, I was in there the entire time with all the scripts on set the whole time. Still now as an executive producer with these edits as we're finishing it up. So I can't keep it at arm's length and say, Hollywood, no, I'm all in on it. So I guess there's pluses and minuses to both, but I sure appreciate them wanting me involved from day one.
I am dumbfounded. I mean, just absolutely fucking dumbfounded. I've never.
It's not the typical Hollywood experience.
No.
Actually, although I will say that the guys over at SEAL Team, they have a great showrunner, and they've had. Remy, who's worked with you, he's worked on there a little bit. Tyler Gray's over there, our buddy. Mm-hmm. But all those guys have been super, like, it's funny what you said about Fuqua's experience with military people on Tears of the Sun, because that's exactly what you hear from all the people that work with Tyler Gray over on SEAL Team. It's like this dude just shows up and does all the work, and we're all just like, all right, cool, I guess we'll go home.
Yeah.
Like he's working like 19 hours a day, and everybody else is like, yeah, but that's kind of how it is, right?
Yeah.
There's so much like similarities between set, or at least in my my slim experience, which is one show now, and the military. But the guy I talked about who gave Chris the book, the rough draft of it, his name's Jared Shaw, and he's a producer on the show. He plays a character on the show. He had to audition for it. It wasn't handed to him, and he crushes. And he's been involved each and every day as a producer, looking at the different areas we're going to film and helping rewrite scripts and all that sort of thing. So I can't imagine it without him. Ray Mendoza, another SEAL that I serve with, is doing the technical advising. He did stuff on Lone Survivor, and he was in Act of Valor. Just Max Adams, another guy, former Ranger, who was there from day one on the scripts, also producing and working on these scripts. So without those guys, I can't imagine what it would look like. And my takeaway is I'm so shocked, one, that anything gets made in Hollywood, and two, that anything good gets made in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't anymore.
So opportunities to mess it up. There's many more opportunities to mess it up than there are to make it good.
Well, there's been a couple, like, to be really frank, Amazon's been doing a really fucking good job over the past couple of years, right? So the new version of Jack Reacher is a lot more realistic. Well, when I say realistic, I mean it's a lot more true to the original work.
To the book, yeah.
Yeah. And John Krasinski, right? In the show, I think they're going to do a third season of that one as well, right? Super brutal. There's a lot of fucking crazy shit going on there. They're producing good series.
Yeah, they're not bad. Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is nominated for a gajillion things. I'm sure this one will be too. I'm still dumbfounded. You've never got any notes from a publisher. Like, that is fucking insane. It makes me want to drive my car off a bridge hearing that. I just pulled up my email from the last, because we had a blowout with Penguin and their editing team on the last one. And I said, I'm going to just read it word for word. If you new to this book anymore, you might as well have Alyssa Milano write the fucking intro. That was my last email back to them. I was so angry. Yeah, and it was like things like, you can't say he fucked that girl. You have to say he made love to that girl or had sex with that girl. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm surprised you just have carte blanche, but you're also like a Bible author, where besides whoever wrote the Bible, you've kind of sold more copies than everybody else at this point. So like,
I'm working on it. Not quite there yet, but every day I am working on it. My editor also is Vince Flynn's. Was Vince Flynn's editor. So Emily Bessler.
Yeah.
So she did all that with Vince, and built that series and that franchise with him. So she's not new to the game, I guess is the way to put it. And obviously those knocked it out of the park.
Well, that's interesting you said that, because to have a female editor is a nice go-between with the publishers, because what a lot of people don't realize, and we get this all the time on this show in particular, everybody who served overseas comes back and they want to write a book about it. And we always tell them the same thing of like, hey, dude, the brutal shit that's in there, publishers don't want to hear about it or read it, because predominantly it's women who run most of these publishing houses. And so when they're reading these books and when they're reading your pitch deck or whatever you turn in, it's going to women, so you kind of have to cater it a little to them. The fact that you have a female editor is probably pretty helpful, I would imagine.
Yeah, I never thought of it in those terms. I just looked in the back of Vince Flynn's books and saw Emily Bessler in there getting thanked. And I'm like, oh, this is who I want to have edit my books. This is the only person I'm sending it to. So she read it, loved it, and wanted to publish it. So I got lucky. So I got my exact editor, exact publisher that I wanted as well. So I got extremely lucky across the board there. But you're right. When I walk through Simon & Schuster building, or when I used to do that before COVID,
in New York? Yeah, the one in New York?
In New York, yeah. Go in New York, up the building. You're right. One of my first impressions, and I didn't know walking in, but I walked in, I'm like, oh, female. It's noticeable how many females are in publishing. The CEO, who sadly passed away in 2020, Carolyn Reedy, she was amazing. And she was just so kind to me. Before I'd sold one book, I was up in her office sitting there talking about books and publishing and reading, and walking by all the Simon & Schuster authors on the walls to her big office. And she was just could not have been kinder. But my mom's a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books, love of reading, in and out of bookstores, in and out of libraries my whole life. My mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, all very strong female figures in my life. So I felt right at home at Simon & Schuster, and Emily Bessler could not have been kinder to me, and she's just incredible.
I mean, she's still working with Kyle Mills, who picked up for Flynn after Vince Flynn died and stopped writing them. Well, obviously he didn't continue writing after he was dead. Right. But Kyle Mills picked up, and I think Flynn, when he got sick, hand-selected Mills to continue his work. So she's been working on that franchise, I guess, since 98, I think is when it first started.
98 was the first. 97, 98 was Term Limits without Mitch Rapp, and he published that I forget himself, and then Emily saw it and wanted to buy it. I think that's how that worked. And then she's also Brad Thor's editor as well, so she has a lot of experience in this genre. And but the entire team up there has been fantastic. I mean, every day I wake up and think of how lucky I am to have that team in New York, an agent that doesn't give any input as far as what I should be doing next at all.
What?
Just the transaction. I didn't know before this either. My only impression of agents were from Californication with David Duchovny, and that other one.
That's how they are, Jack. God damn it, dude. Did something happen to you in the past that was so fucked up that you deserve all of this crazy shit?
No, they just know he's a sniper, so they're fucking like...
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been all great, life in general, I mean, I feel very fortunate just to be born in this country. I feel like I won the lotto just by being born in the United States and being able to choose my path. But yeah, my agent, she's female also. And yeah, she just does that transaction and gets that part done. And that's really it. So then it just comes down to me and this computer that I'm talking to you guys on right now.
That's amazing. With so much positivity in your life, what's something negative that happened to you?
Well, I mean, the main drive, actually, why I get up every single morning and just go all day, and why I probably should take more of a breath every now and again. So we have a middle child with severe special needs, needs 24/7 full-time care forever. So I think about that in financial terms, what that's going to cost after my wife and I pass away, and not wanting that financial burden to fall on his brother, sister. So for me, the drive isn't quote unquote success. It is making sure that his trust is funded in a way that's going to take care of him at the level that we want for his entire lifetime. So he's 14 now. So there's quite a few years to fund there, but that's probably my main driver, other than loving what I do. But I love the writing part. It's all the other stuff that you have to do now, social media, marketing, and advertising, all that sort of a thing. I didn't really realize you had to do when I stepped into this space. I thought I could come up to the mountains here and just write and then send it in and then start the next one. And maybe that's true 30 years ago, not today, unless you're a total outlier. Like, you have to do a lot of the work that you could just say, oh, my publisher's going to do that, or that you couldn't have done 30 years ago, like doing this podcast, or responding to someone on social media, or even creating a social media account, having a website, all those things that you didn't do in 1985, 75, 95 that you do today. They grow based on how much you put into it. And that's on the author.
Yeah, and like you were saying, it's a totally different ball game now, and they expect it from you. And if you don't do it, then congratulations, we're on to the next author, and they don't really give a shit. But they want you doing all of the things on social media, all the podcasts you can possibly do, everything else, because podcasts, this audience in particular, buys a lot of books, and it's smart. Matthew McConaughey was on here when he had Green Lights come out, and it ended up, I think the audiobook ended up knocking off Obama the following week. And
it's still on there.
Yeah. For number one. I mean, it is insane, but he was smart. He tapped into every single podcast there was. And I think his publicist even reached back out and was like, do you know any other podcasts that are your size that we could get him on? We were like, yeah, absolutely. And he cracked the code on that. And I think that's a valuable tool for anybody who's an author or a publisher or whatever, is like, utilize the podcast, because you can come on and talk for hours. Otherwise, you're just doing Jimmy Fallon for 8 minutes. It's a segment that it's already pre-scripted. You don't really get to say what you want to say or talk about your books or what you're interested and excited in. It's just a brief segment, and then it's done. This is cataloged, and people can just search your name and go back and listen to all your interviews. Now you personally have a podcast. How's that going?
Yeah, no, that's great. But the other side of that too is, if you get Jimmy Fallon, which is reserved for that top tier, like a Matthew McConaughey or maybe a John Grisham or a Stephen King, someone like that. If you get that, wonderful. But for everybody else, now those people aren't the kingmakers anymore. So if you don't get CBS This Morning, or you don't get Good Morning America, that's okay now. Whereas in 85 or 95, like, you needed those. Now you don't need those anymore. And that's, I mentioned that actually in my last book about legacy media still thinking that they're the kingmakers when history has already passed them by. And you things like this. And you can create these, you can jump on these different platforms and do this and engage with an audience and actually thank them for buying your book and for telling friends about it. And that's what I use social media for. But same thing. That's why I started my own podcast, is because I kept getting these questions about issues that were a little more contentious and didn't lend themselves to a 2-sentence response on Twitter. So I thought, hey, I'll start a podcast so I can talk about some of these things. And if people are interested in my opinion, they can just go to the podcast. But then it grew very quickly, and was successful right out of the gate. And now it's kind of its own thing, and it's gone beyond that. But it's fun because I can, just like with you guys, I'm not on my phone right now. I'm not looking at email right now. Mm-hmm. I'm not thinking about anything else except our conversation. So and even in person now, like, we're distracted by all those things. So 30 years ago, we could have had a conversation in person and we might both have been getting buzzed on our cell phones for something. Whereas right now, even though this is an electronic medium, we don't have our phones on and we're talking and having a conversation. So it's so strange that the digital world distracts us. But once we turn that off and we're in this digital world, we can have this conversation like we're having now that maybe we wouldn't have even had in person because of our phones and everything else that's distracting us.
Yeah, and I was listening to your podcast on the way over to work today, and I guess my biggest question is, because you were talking about Ukraine in the last one and what's going on in Ukraine. Are you worried now that you're entrenched into Hollywood with two of the biggest there is? Are you worried about what you say on a podcast and how Hollywood might react to it?
No, because I think that even what trumps that is that, it's that overused word, but is not a better one yet, that authenticity piece. Mm-hmm. And people can tell if you're lying, people can tell if you're not being yourself. And I think the power of being yourself and being authentic, regardless of what people think about it, trumps what you actually say as far as their political leanings. Like, it's very obvious. I don't even have to say it. You can just look at my Instagram and you can find out that I fully support the Bill of Rights. You don't even need to say it. I couldn't not be me. That would be very difficult. I think it'd be difficult for anyone, but in particular, I certainly can't do it. I couldn't be anybody else, but there's power to that as well. Even if people disagree with you, they can have respect for your opinion, especially if you do it in a thoughtful way. And I try to do things in a thoughtful way, whether it's the books, whether it's just a single sentence post on Instagram or Twitter, whether it's a blog thing on my social media or my website. No matter what it is, I try to at least be thoughtful about it, because people are trusting me with their time and they're not getting that time back. Like, people that are listening to this, or watching us, they are not getting this time back, and they've trusted us with that time, and that's a responsibility that I take seriously.
I agree. And do you enjoy it? Because now you're the host of one and not just a guest on other people's shows. Do you enjoy doing it?
I do, but it's a lot more work than I thought.
Yeah.
People would say, "Oh, no barriers to entry." You kept hearing that, or I did anyway. And then I tried to record a few, and I did, but then I didn't know what to do. Then it became platforms and passwords and all the rest. And I know my limitations. Like, I know my capabilities and limitations, just like with a sniper weapon system. And I got as far as being able to record. That was it. So then I brought Ironclad in, who produces it, and they deal with all the other stuff. But it's a lot more work that I've, so far anyway, and it's only been a year, but I've read every book for every author who has come on. And that's been a lot of books, but it's great in that I get some ideas that I wouldn't have had otherwise, because I wouldn't have forced myself to read these books, because I wouldn't have had a guest coming up that I needed to prep for. So I got these different ideas that I've woven into this latest novel from guests that have come on the podcast, because I've read that. I don't know if I'll always be able to read their books, because things are pretty busy, but up to this point, I've read each one.
I was going to say, with your schedule, I don't know how you read all those books, because Dan and I get a lot of authors on this show, and we get their books in advance. We try to read as much as we can in the short amount of time, because sometimes the guests get booked the day before or whatever, and then they'll send the book, and you're like, well, shit, I can't read this in one day, but we'll give it a shot. Since you were talking about it on your podcast, tell the audience what your thoughts are on this Russia-Ukraine war that's happening currently.
Yeah, it's interesting because I studied this for my second novel, for True Believer. So I wrote the first one, and then before I even submitted it to Simon & Schuster, I was writing that second one. And I was doing that because of the John Grisham story and how he wrote A Time to Kill first. Matthew McConaughey starred in the movie later, but he wrote that first, and then he couldn't give that book away. Then he writes The Firm. Then Tom Cruise stars. It takes off. They republish A Time to Kill, which I think is his best work. But if he had just stopped at that first one, he might still be practicing law today, and we wouldn't have had a John Grisham novel every year. So I always knew I was writing that second one. So I was flying to Mozambique, put boots on the ground, do that research for that second novel. Then when I got back from that, I sent the first book to Simon & Schuster. It gets picked up, and I'm still writing the second one. But the research for that second one was, a lot of it was about Ukraine. And I'd been to Odessa previously. I'd been to the catacombs under the city. So I needed to weave in some places that I'd already been if I couldn't go to them, like Morocco, Odessa. So I put that in there, but I studied the situation there. And I read this book, and I actually had this out because I was referencing it recently here, and it's The Accidental Superpower by Peter Zihan here. And he talks about Russia population. He talks about how since the fall of the Soviet Union, ethnic Russians have been in a decline population, where so much so that they probably only have about 2 generations left to go. And in this book, which was written in 2014, he gives 8 years as his estimate, just looking at numbers, just looking at population decline, as to when Russia would need to annex a former Soviet state in order to get ethnic Russians back into their population base. And outside of Russia, Ukraine has the largest number of ethnic Russians. So we're right at that 8-year mark right now. And what does Putin do? He invades. So I think people aren't really looking at that. They're looking or Putin's looking at it as survival of Russia by annexing and taking back control of the Ukraine, so they can have more Russians to continue that.
And that's why Boris Yeltsin put him in power in the first place, right? I mean, he was a KGB guy. Not really involved in politics that much, and then all of a sudden, 94, I think Boris Yeltsin starts pushing him to the forefront, and it's all kind of toppled from there.
Yeah.
What about the conflict that's going on right now? I'm seeing it seems like over the past couple of years, people have gone from medical experts to stock experts to now war experts, people that have never fired a gun in anger in their lives, or have super interesting opinions about how this is all going. There's a lot of propaganda coming out of both sides over there. You know how the Ukrainian government is not too far flung from Russian government, just the way they operate and message and stuff. There's a 40-mile long convoy of armor sitting north of the city. But what you hear, like if you go to Drudge Report or fucking CNN or any of these other websites, all you'll see is stories of Ukraine victory, right, in one form or another. But I don't think they're really. I honestly don't think they represent reality, because Russia is so much larger, both in technological capability, militarily, and in actual fighting force than Ukraine. Like this has not been. I guess from a spectator's position, it doesn't look great for Russia, but they fight wars the way people used to. Like, we're used to seeing America fight wars, which is to say, rapidly capture everything we can and then fight an insurgency, basically, right? Russia is not doing that. They're just trying to surround the capital city right now with forces. Like, this thing is not, by any stretch of the imagination, even close to over. I don't even think it's really gotten started in earnest yet.
Yeah, so I think that Putin probably fell victim to his generals giving him a more rosy picture of Russian military preparedness than they actually had.
Those conscripts are basically useless. I mean, they've done nothing.
Young, which goes back to that population decline. So they don't have a professional, they have a professional military, but not one where you have seasoned people in positions that you want them in. And much like a lot of the places that we went around the world, we saw those senior leaders have to lie up the chain so they wouldn't get their head chopped off. Yep. So not exactly the same in Russia, but not far off either. And I think they expected that Ukraine to roll over, which is why I think they didn't kill the president of Ukraine first as a trigger and then invade. I think they expected him to either flee or for or to get killed in this first invasion, that then when it didn't go as quite as fast as they thought, oh, now they have to deal with this guy who's galvanized his military, his people, and the world in general, just through leadership. So I don't think they expected that. And could they go back? I think they would probably decapitate that government first, take him out, and then roll in. But they have a certain amount of time they could do it. And after the Olympics, because China is getting a great deal with these oil and energy treaties that they just signed with Russia. So they had to wait till after the Olympics, but before the ground thaws, it gets all muddy and it's harder to move troops and armor and all the rest of it. But bigger geopolitical play here is Russia slowly moving into the Arctic over the last few years and they want those shipping lanes up there. So if they take those shipping lanes, China takes Taiwan and has control of South China Sea, East China Sea, Philippine Sea, and they look at Taiwan obviously the same way Russia looks at Ukraine is, hey, this is a part of our country. We're just going to annex it back here. But that's the larger geopolitical play there, is controlling that South China Sea, East China Sea, Philippine Sea, controlling the Arctic and those shipping lanes up there, and having that alliance both politically, militarily, diplomatically between China and Russia. So that's the bigger play here.
Yeah, for sure.
As far as the media is concerned, like we've been following the coverage here, and I don't know what to believe and what not to believe. I'm not sure if you saw the video this morning of the captured Russian soldiers crying, saying that they had no idea they were actually going to war. They thought it was a training exercise, and now there's video of them. It appears as if there's 8 or 9 of them in this video, speaking one by one, just saying that they felt like they were sent to their death because they didn't know they were even going into war. They thought it was a training exercise. The latest report here, according to this media outlet, says Ukraine is claiming that they have killed 6,000 Russians. Is any of this true? And what do we believe?
Right. So right now we're conditioned, or a lot of us are anyway, to question anything out there. We have a distrust of media for good reason, especially over the last 2 years, not just the last decade. So we have reasons to distrust the media in general. And then you throw propaganda campaigns from both Russia and Ukraine into the mix, and then it really gets complicated. So when this is all said and done, it'll be very interesting to study it and see, hey, what was real, what wasn't, what worked, and what didn't, and then how can we apply those to our future battle plans, and how can we anticipate other countries like China doing that in the future as well, so we're not surprised by it.
Yeah, because I look at this and like, shit, man, I have no idea what to believe.
The first casualty of war is always the truth. That's somebody smarter than me said that a long time ago, but it's true in every single war. I think this time is a little bit different, though. Like I said, I think on Monday, because people have the ability to identify what's fake a lot more rapidly now, and it's that process where there's clear propaganda from both sides of a war, and then you add in this element where the American left is billing this as a very simple black and white, good versus evil, democracy versus socialism, or whatever the fuck they have going on. But it is, as he mentioned before, far more complicated than any of that shit. And it doesn't do anybody in Ukraine or Russia, and when I say anybody, I mean the actual citizens of those countries. It doesn't do them any favors, and it doesn't do us as somebody who has international responsibilities and great military power and economic investments in that area to pretend otherwise. Like it's just black and white. That's bullshit.
Yeah, and the only person I've heard speak intelligently on this matter, really breaking it down from both sides of, hey, dude, it's not just a comedian there in office in Ukraine, was Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard did a video on Instagram kind of telling you why both sides were a fucking problem to root for, and what you should expect, out of Ukraine and Russia separately.
You would think we would have learned our lesson by now. Right? We fuck around in Iran and get the most insane people on earth in charge of a giant nuclear power and the strongest country in that region. We fuck around in Afghanistan and create the fucking Taliban, right? We just keep doing this shit over and over and over again. What the fuck? It's like we never learn our lesson.
One lesson we can take from it is how important it is to be energy independent. I mean, for right now, if you think that it's not important for us to be energy independent on the world stage, and that it's okay to keep paying our enemies for our energy, which also happens to drive our economy and our military machine, we're done for. So this is like one chance maybe for people to exercise a little common sense. What Clausewitz said was the most important attribute of any leader is having common sense. You don't need to study geopolitics. You don't need to have been in the military. All you need to do is take a breath, look at what's happening and say, I think it would probably be better if we were energy independent right now and not beholden to Iran, not beholden to Russia, and not be paying our enemies like that. I just don't understand how anyone
that
could
part's
think
wild.
that is a good idea, especially when we're doing it to ourselves. We're putting ourselves in a diplomatic and strategically disadvantageous position on purpose. It's a choice. Just like we put our troops at a tactically disadvantageous position as we're leaving Afghanistan. We're doing the same thing strategically and diplomatically here by being dependent on foreign sources of energy.
And unnecessarily so too. I mean, it's completely unnecessary. I have a piece in Newsweek today actually about this exact fucking subject. And we were energy independent from 18 to 20, right? Producing more oil than we needed. And selling it. We were the largest producer of oil in the world, and not completely energy independent, but as far as we wanted to be, we were energy independent. And we had Keystone coming up, which is going to produce another 800 to 900,000 barrels a day. We only consume about we only were importing at that point like 500,000. So we were about to double up. So it was going to be like a 14-point swing in football, right? Like a pick six on a play you should have scored on, and within 1 year, Biden fucked that all up. And it's because he's completely captured by this leftist nonsense. Like, I get it. Green energy is a good idea. Finding a renewable source of energy that's readily available and plentiful for everyone, great idea. Love that idea. All of the silicon fiber, about 91% in the world that you use to make solar panels, comes from fucking China. It's just, green energy is not ready for prime time. And we've pretended like it is. And Biden has put us on this path to be completely carbon neutral by 2035. We will not be a country in 2035 if that is our fucking trajectory. It just won't happen. This is fucking stupid. Yeah,
it's ridiculous. Did you watch the State of the Union last night, Jack?
I did. I did. Yeah. There's a couple things in there, though. I mean, at first was just them walking in. I don't know if anybody else, I haven't heard anybody else talk about this yet, but, I see the Secretary of Defense, just big smile on his face as he's walking in, shaking hands. And then to hear the president talk about accountability when he talked about police officers, but those police officers he talked about had nothing to do with them not doing their job correctly. Yet we have somebody who walked in, the Secretary of Defense, we had those other guys in their uniforms, smiling, shaking hands, zero accountability, not just for how we left Afghanistan, but for the previous 20 years of misadventures as well. Zero accountability on that side of the house that depleted our blood and our treasure, and they're smiling and shaking hands. Meanwhile, you talk about police officer accountability and cite 2 dead police officers who did not do anything wrong. That part irked me beyond words.
Yeah, I watched it, and we have a gambling sponsor on the show, mybookie.com. Promo code Drinkin Bros will double your deposit. I'll just go ahead and give them a free read today. But with that, they had over-unders and how fast the speech was going to go and everything else. He appeared to me to race through that speech as if whatever they inject him with, it was like, hey, dude, you've got a fucking hour here.
No, he turns into a pumpkin at midnight.
It was,
yeah,
but did you catch the speed of it? Like, just the cadence of, because usually, there's a lot of standing up, clapping, and everything else.
I still won the over, though.
Did you?
The over-under was 59.5, and he went 102.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Okay. But with that, there was a lot of cutaways to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and they were trying to stand up, but they couldn't stand up. And you were just like, what? Wait, was he supposed to, did he tell them? I was confused by the whole thing. Did he not tell them, like, hey, dude, I just got to get through this as fast as possible. Can you please just sit the fuck down? Because it was so odd to watch. I was like, man, there had to have been, it's almost like a stand-up comedian where there's a red light in the back where you're like, was there a red light about to go on where it's like the meds are going to wear off there? I found that very bizarre as well.
That was noticeable that there was a lot less clapping, a lot less standing. Usually that's about half the speech time wise. I mean, not quite, but it's noticeably long that you're sitting there waiting for him to start again, and these people won't stop clapping, so you can get on to whatever you need to do the rest of your night. But it was noticeabally different this time, no doubt about that.
Well, Nancy Pelosi was also on a bit of Adderall too. You could tell from the mouth movements. Her mouth didn't stop moving the entire time.
No,
that's a person. That's a person that's a person that doesn't typically take stimulants who took them for the first time.
Yeah,
or not the first time, but like. She definitely took them last night. There's a lot of stupid shit.
She's 81 years old, I think, and like to go from 9 to midnight or whatever at 81, that's a lot. And then you're on camera because it was just her and Kamala behind him the entire time, and you gotta keep the appearances going. However, you can't chew your jaw off as if you've been on a 12-day coke binge.
Well, the other theory is that her dentures were falling out.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, it kind of did look like that a couple times. That's just old people shit. I was a lot more concerned about the things that were being said. So one of the things Biden said about infrastructure was that they're going to provide free internet to everyone. Now, I just want to go through that and what that means. It's not the government. One, it's not the government's job to provide the internet for everybody. Get a fucking job and pay for it, bitch. But beyond that, here's what happens. Companies get no-bid government contracts, right, or narrowly bid, preferentially treated government contracts, and instead of you getting to choose your product, the government chooses it for you, and they force you to pay for it by taxes under penalty of law. This isn't giving everybody free internet. This is removing your individual liberty away from you. Fuck that shit.
And there was
and apply that to every other thing the government says they're going to give you for free. It's the same thing. They choose the provider. They take your tax money and buy it for you and give it to you in the way they deem fit. And if you don't pay your taxes, you go to fucking prison. That's not choice. That's not good. That's not the government's fucking job.
And it reminds me of what Zuckerberg tried to do with Africa. He was going to give that whole continent free internet, from space and everything else. But you had to sign in through Facebook because they don't have any users of Facebook in Africa, or the numbers are low. But by giving them free internet and then going in and starting from Facebook, then congratulations, we'll give you free internet for that. To your points, if it was run by the government, they would have everything we have. All of our data, every single thing. Yes, they would fucking want that. Absolutely, they would want that.
And then some of the other stuff he said about, he basically created this issue, as we discussed, regarding energy independence that made our ability to interdict on Russia early without violence completely a non-option. Like, we couldn't do it because we were at his will at that point. And they try to tout the fact that they're releasing 60 million barrels from the strategic reserve. It reminded me so much of Afghanistan. When the 82nd Airborne had to deploy to Afghanistan, that's not your plan. That is contingency. The DRF-1 is a contingency plan. We deploy because shit's gone wrong. That's a breaking case of emergency. That's not on somebody's fucking PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. And this is the same thing, saying that, we're going to fix this by releasing 60 million barrels. Why didn't you fucking keep your mouth shut about Anwar and fucking all the other the shale and fracking and all the stuff that we're doing to get our own energy, right? We'll deal with everything else later. You know what I mean? Yeah. That shit is fucking maddening to me.
Yeah, and there's a few other things there too. When we're talking about Pelosi, and our kids noticed it too. They're like, "What is she doing back there?" It was so noticeable.
Yeah,
it was distracting. Interesting, but she's been a savvy investor. So I guess a lot of these, other than wanting to selflessly serve their country and in some of the highest offices in the land, they're also just very good investors, and it's very interesting how those two things just go together somehow.
It's pretty wild.
When we look at things we can do, getting back to energy independence, continuing to grow that because it gives us power and allows us to lead in the world, not being beholden to these different countries through investments from some of our political leaders and their families, sometimes very close family members, not being reliant on China, particularly technology and pharmaceuticals, like all these things. We have intent. It's been our fault. We have put, and as an electorate, it's been our fault. We have put people into positions of power, not leaders, but elected representatives. They are elected representatives. They are our employees. They represent our interests in government. And yet we keep thinking of them as leaders because they do have so much power now. So those things, being less reliant on China, energy independent, not having these politicians beholden to foreign interests. But a lot of that, and let's talk about the border also. Like those things make us such a more strong, effective country. Anyway, so those are some of the main takeaways of these last few years, but especially these last few days, seeing Ukraine and the State of the Union and where we're headed as a country. But it's up to us as the electorate. Like we need to I said on Tucker the other night, stop tweeting and start reading. We need to educate ourselves, read, and put people into these positions that actually do represent us, and then hold them accountable. That's the accountability piece that's just lost across the board these
100%.
days.
The last thing, well, not the exact last thing that he said, because that was "go get him," and I'm not sure who that was.
I don't know.
He's like, it was almost like
what is he? What?
Yeah, it was almost like Howard Dean was like, back in the
go
day.
Get him.
Yeah, he's like, go get him. I'm like, maybe he was formed into his former self, where he was in like a football locker room trying to give a psych-up speech or some shit. But the last coherent sentence he said was, "We are stronger today than we were a year ago, and we'll be stronger a year from now than we are today." Now, I don't know about the second half of that sentence, but the first half is absolute fucking nonsense.
Yeah.
We're not stronger now than we were a year ago. You fucking dummy. What are you talking about? I mean, look, I know it's part of the president's job to completely lie about during the State of the Union unless he's actually competent, which the guy's not. But that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. Like any metric, right?
Yeah.
From inflation to housing to wages and then all the other shit going on foreign policy-wise and the border, literally everything is worse. Mm-hmm. Everything is worse now than it was a year ago. Just say that, but like, hey, it's been a fucked up year, bro.
Yeah. It would have been great if he would have just popped out a heater, started smoking on stage, and was just like, look, man, I'm fucking going through it. I'm also 79, and I'm not worried about cancer anymore. Yeah. So who gives a shit? But, man, everything's going to hell in a handbasket right now.
Much of this
I would have respected that.
So much of the stuff he said was demonstrably untrue and stupid. Like, he tried to give Trump heat for pharmaceutical shit. Oh, my God. He's talking about cutting the cost of prescription drugs. Trump tried to do that twice.
Yeah.
And he got fucking blocked from doing it, A. And B, the pharmaceutical industry gave Biden $5.9 million for his presidential campaign, about 4 times more than they gave Trump.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't give anything to Trump directly. It was through PACs and shit. Mm-hmm. But $6 million to like 1.1 million, basically. Like, it's not even close who's on the fucking take. And before Biden this past year, historically, Hillary Clinton had been the most supported by the big pharma of any politician in American history. So they can get fucked with all this shit, right? Here's a question for you. You're a writer and you interact with the public a lot, and I think it's been hard for people that are reasonable people to truly believe. It's a lot easier to believe that voting machines have been hacked, or that there's a lot of Russian and Chinese bots on Twitter. I think it's easier to believe those things than it is to believe that we have a severely mentally, intellectually compromised subset of our population right now that is afraid, and they'll believe whatever the fuck they're told as long as it comes from the government, as long as it comes from their side of the government. Like, I think that's hard for some people to believe because it's scary as shit that 45% of our country is fucking brainwashed. But it seems more and more like that is the truth.
Yeah.
It's so tough, and then you see things like I forget exactly where I saw it, but it's some organization talking about gun control, and someone juxtaposed that with them now rooting for Ukraine to hand out semi-automatic weapons to 18-year-olds or fighting age males.
Yeah, they're good with the 2A and nationalism and us first stuff as long as it's in another country and not ours, right? Like, that's just imagine the thinking behind that. Yeah. Like, oh, it's good for them.
Yeah, it's not really thinking behind it. I think we don't really understand how to think logically. Kids go to school. Obviously, most teachers are to the left of center. But even if they were just teaching algebra, they were just teaching history, they were just teaching these things, fine. They're not teaching how to think logically, which is the most important thing that you can get from a parent, from a mentor, from a teacher, is to learn how to think so you can solve problems in a way that makes sense rather than just retweet something real quick because it comes from someone who also didn't put the requisite time, energy, and effort into studying whatever that issue was. So that's what we owe our country, is putting that time in, putting that study in, rather than getting everything from 2 sentences on Twitter and retweeting it. Now that is your opinion because you saw it from X, Y, or Z, who are also not reliable sources because they did not put the time into study. And there's, what is that Einstein quote, which really is not an Einstein quote. It's just been attributed to him over time about having an hour to save the world and spending 55 minutes studying the problem and then 5 minutes trying to solve it.
Right.
There's a lot to that.
The other thing that's astonishing too after last night is immediately the media will release a story or a poll telling you how great the speech was. So the numbers came in 70. This is according to CBS News. Their poll shows that 78% of Americans who watched the State of the Union approved of President Biden's speech, with 49% of viewers
There's no way that's
identifying
true.
as Democrats, 21% is Republican, 28% is independent. So 78%, and you're able to get that number that quickly.
Now, why did they give Democrats? If you understand anything about data distribution, why is the subset 50% left and then 25% of each of the remainder? That's not how the distribution in a fucking poll like that should work, by the way.
No, but
so when they say 78%, that means 90% of the original group and then maybe 30% of the other two groups. That's what that means. So go to a math class and learn how to think and not what to think. And that'll help you understand what you just said, which is complete bullshit.
Yeah, and then it trends on Twitter, right? So everybody reads this, and then they think, well, it must be true. CBS, a respected network and news agency, it must be true, right? And then you break down the numbers just as Dan did, and you're like, wait a minute, why was there 50% and only 25% of each of the others?
Well, this was an interesting one, too, because there wasn't one last year. Also, I think the bar was low. Expectations were extremely low, whether you knew it or not, whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you're thinking about it in those terms. I mean, you're seeing him walk from Marine One across that lawn. I mean, you're seeing these different things. So subliminally, even, you've got to be putting that bar a little lower, got to be putting that expectation a little lower. And when it's not a complete dumpster fire and you're just looking at the tone, maybe, I can see how you'd say, that wasn't as bad as I thought. I approve of that speech. So there's a lot to it, I think.
Here's how low the bar is, Jack, that every morning I wake up and he's still alive. That's kind of a small victory.
Do you remember
like, holy shit, the president's still alive.
Do you remember the first X-Men movie when that senator turned to water after they tried to convert him or whatever? That's what Joe Biden looks like to me every day. Like, I'm just waiting for him to just turn into water.
It's close, or just a soppy, wet diaper.
Yeah, well,
that thing you were just tossing, we actually had that on the show yesterday about him walking across the lawn.
Yeah, it was a poop walk.
It was a poop walk. He was wearing a diaper.
You shit your pants before. You've had to
Jack,
do a
you've
poop
shit
walk.
your pants before.
I'm going to share that with my wife because we were looking at it together and we're like, what is this walk?
It's a poop walk.
I'm going to let her know that it's a poop walk.
It's a poop walk.
Yeah.
We'll be like, oh, yeah. Look, now that you say it, I'm like, oh, yeah. That's.
And don't forget that just a few months ago, he shit himself in front of the Pope.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then for people that didn't believe that, like that was kind of a rumor going around because people were talking about it in inner circles in D.C. But then the next week, the Duchess of Cornwall, who's married to the next King of England, by the way, wouldn't stop talking about how Joe Biden just fucking crop dusted her. They're in the middle of a conversation. It's like, so anyways, these Republicans, like, what the fuck? You're the president, bro. At least cough or something or blame it on somebody.
Yeah, it was a sweet poop walk, Jack. You know,
it's a poop walk for sure.
You can put that in one of your books for sure.
Mud butt.
You got a little mud butt, and you got to walk that off. You know,
it's tough now because say like 1985, writing something as fiction was maybe a little different because today. Man, they're making it very difficult.
Seriously, you're going to have to start writing reality at some point.
Crazy. Yeah, it's so crazy what is going on out there that it's making it more difficult to stay out of the science fiction section.
It is. Speaking of which, we can pivot over to books. What do you have coming up after this series?
Well, there's a lot going on. So I have the next book after this one. So the one that comes out on May 17th, In the Blood. And the next one will come out about that same time next year. We're dealing with the figuring out the scripts for if there's a season 2. So what that's gonna look like. And then there's so many things in the fire. Obviously the podcast, and then I have all these other ideas too that I'm in the process of prioritizing. I get asked a lot about nonfiction, and I wouldn't write a nonfiction book about my experiences in the SEAL teams or anything like that. People did so much more than I ever even came close to doing. And there's a lot of those books out there already, so I would never do something like that. But there's some other things, some historical events or people that I'm interested in writing about through my lens, both as a student of history, student of the hunt, student of warfare, with a little bit of that experience as well. And then now having the platform and an audience that is receptive to that sort of a thing, wanting that sort of a thing. So I'm prioritizing a few other things, but at the top is getting the next book done, and I'm already off to the races on that one.
Yeah, because you beat me to the punch. I was going to ask you about nonfiction. Like you mentioned, there's a ton of SEAL books and everything else.
Yeah, yours is the first book I read that was written by a SEAL where I couldn't tell the guy was wearing hair gel when he wrote it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That is a pretty big compliment.
We are known for that. And I do get beard companies reaching out to sponsor the podcast and stuff, and doing that sort of thing. I'm like, the whole point of the beard is so I don't have to do any of that sort of thing. That's the whole point. So I can't do it. In good conscience, I can't do it. It's just not me. So that's a no right off the bat. But I appreciate that. And yeah, no, I was very cognizant when I started out down this path that I didn't want to be, hey, the SEAL author. I want to be an author that people are like, oh, he used to be a SEAL. And there's a difference between those two things. And I've been a student of this my entire life, growing up reading Tom Clancy and David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and AJ Quinnell and JC Pollock and Mark Olden and all these guys that I grew up reading in the 80s. Those guys provided really the foundation. They were my professors in the art of storytelling. And they allow me to build off that. And reading those guys in the 80s, like reading Brotherhood of the Rose in 1986, was so cool because I didn't have these 30, 40 years of biases and experiences, and I didn't have to filter it through all those years of cynicism and whatever else is built up. It was just pure magic. And those stories had heart from those authors that I just mentioned. And so that's what I'm trying to do today is carry on that legacy with those guys as essentially my mentors, even though they didn't know it at the time, and provide that same thing to readers today.
But is there one guy, like one celebrity that you would say, all right, this person is so fascinating, I would drop whatever I'm doing and write their biography of their life?
Ooh, I've not thought of that before. And no, because I'm contractually obligated to finish this next one first. So that's an easy answer. But after that, I had to put a little more thought into that. And I don't think so, unless it was another author who has been around for a long, long time. And I'm not sure exactly who that would be. But yeah, no, this next book is at the top of the list.
What about this book? So it's Red Dawn.
Yep.
Reimagined. It's a reboot. It's not like a sequel or anything. Red Dawn reboot like they did with Chris Hemsworth or whatever. Mm-hmm. But this time it's all Xennials, and they're just like TikTok dancing in front of Russian tanks.
And Zoomers? Yeah.
Just like that would be really funny to me. It would only be like a 3-minute movie, but
3-minute movie, short story. Probably 2 pages tops.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of those ones I don't think they lend themselves to, especially ones in the 80s. Like, I think you have to go back further if you're going to do a remake, just because the 80s was such a special time. And we had the Red Menace, we had the Soviet Union, we knew our enemy, terrorism was on the rise. So you got to dabble there as well.
Yeah, when they swapped him out for North Korea, that really didn't track for me. No, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense.
I agree.
Yeah, and there's so many more distractions, and there's so many things to check. And like back in the 80s, man, it was just magic when you walked into those movie theaters for movies like Red Dawn and Rambo First Blood Part 2 and whatever else with Top Gun. And but I think you have to go back a little further. So like a remake of The Wild Bunch would be awesome, just because the technology wasn't there for that story back in the day. It was very pivotal. 1969, we had True Grit, you had Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and you had The Wild Bunch. 3 very different Westerns that all paid homage to a different era. So, you had Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is the 60s. And you had True Grit, which paid homage to the past Westerns. And then you had The Wild Bunch, which was looking forward. But you still had like catch-up packs, and you had these things. So if you could redo that today, I think that would be a sweet remake. I've always wanted to do that. And then there's a few out there that are a little older.
Maybe some Louis L'Amour stuff too, yeah.
Man, I cannot believe they didn't remake Last of the Breed or make Last of the Breed into a film in the mid-'80s. That would have been the perfect time. Yeah. And I was just thinking about this yesterday. For this particular film, if they redid it today, it wouldn't be the same. I mean, there was a time right there between when that was written, I think in 87 and like 90, where you could have made an incredible movie, Last of the Breed. If you're doing it now, you're either putting it in modern terms and in modern day, or you're going back to the 80s and doing it there. And then there's not as many touch points with the audience, except for, the 80s generation.
Well, I mean, his style of writing, though, is kind of making a comeback, even in feel like, everything that's going on in Kevin Costner's production house right now, basically, right? Everything that, what's his name, Taylor Sheridan, that is involved in, that dude's just crushing it. But there's a lot of appetite now for realistic violence and Westerns. So maybe there's something out there for you after you get done writing about
Westerns,
operators.
man. Westerns are real hot right now.
Yeah. Well, actually, David Morrell, who wrote First Blood back in 1972, has never been out of print since. He's writing a Western.
Oh, right shit.
Now. Oh, damn.
I would love to see some historical fiction about, like, the Rough Riders and stuff like that back in the day. Not necessarily all the way back into the mid-19th century, but the late 19th century, early 20th. Some of those Roosevelt's Rough Riders, some of those, like, elite...
Nobody's ever done it either, to my knowledge.
Not that I'm aware of. No, like it's historical fiction about elite operators from days from back in the day is something I don't feel like literature or film has done much on so far.
We'll take a note right now. After we get off it, so I'm going to do some thinking before I turn back on my electronic devices.
Yeah.
I would love, it would be so fucking cool to see some of that stuff. I just don't know why nobody's ever done it before.
I don't know. I don't know either. But it's great. Look, you're fantastic. All your work is amazing. Now's the point in the show where we get to the Drinkin' Bro of the Week, which is someone who has inspired you or helped you become the person you are today. Who would you like to give the Drinkin' Bro of the Week to?
Oh man, I mean, my son probably, who makes me get up every morning and drives this train essentially because of his condition. Though he'll never know it, never be able to conceptualize any of that. So that's my first thought anyway. Is to him.
Do you mind if I ask what the condition is?
It's a mutation of a gene that forms the brain, and so he's 14 years old, but needs help with everything for the rest of his life, which is kind of the best way to describe it. But we didn't have a diagnosis on. He was the 13th person in the world they ever diagnosed with it, and the only reason we know that is because someone told Ross Perot, when he was alive, obviously, our story during my last couple of years in the military, and he called me on the phone out of the blue, sounding exactly like Dana Carvey impersonating Ross Perot live in the 90s. And he says, "Hey, we're gonna fix your son. I'm sending the G550, and we're putting a team of doctors together, and we're gonna fix him." And then he hangs up, and I'm like, "What on earth just happened?" And then about an hour later, his lead doctor at Southwestern Medical Center called and said, "Hey, I know Mr. Perot just called and said we're sending the jet tomorrow. It's not coming tomorrow. It'll come in a month. In the meantime, send us everything you have on your son, and we'll put a team of specialists together here and see what we can do." And sure enough, we sent them everything. They sent the jet. We went out there, and they did a bunch of tests and work, and I got to spend a lot of time with Ross Perot, and I got to see him again when my book came out years later, right before he passed away. He still had our son's picture in his office. Just an incredible guy. So without him, we wouldn't know.
Wow, what an amazing story. Meg, thanks for being here today. I know this is a long time coming. You're one of our favorites here. The new book is In the Blood. It is available for pre-order now. Get it in hardback. All those pre-order numbers, especially in hardback, we'll get them on the New York Times bestseller list ASAP. They all count for opening week. Once that week is over, then it resets again, and you have to go back. So now's the best time to pre-order it in hardback. Congratulations on the Amazon series. We're all looking forward to that. I'm sure your agent has told you about the residuals that will be heading your way after that comes out. And my God, man, you're certainly on the path of John Grisham and Tom Clancy and the rest of your heroes. So congratulations on all your success. Thanks for being on Drinkin' Bros today.
Oh man, thank you guys for having me. I'm a huge fan of what you guys are doing, and thank you guys for staying strong and speaking the truth out there, because as a country we certainly need it. So thank you guys.
Thank you. I appreciate it. For D'Anthony Holloway, Jack Carr, I'm Ross Patterson. This is the Drinkin' Bros podcast. Good night, everyone.